So we'll
You're making a mockery of this. It's like crafts up here.
We'll see how she does. I might give her back.
For anyone who doesn't know, this is Poppy, who comes with Caroline everywhere. In fact,
look, I'm a single dog mum. It's a real struggle.
So I want to start. Can we have a show of hands first? Can you tell me who in this room has already read the book, and who is what I like to term a potential customer? Right. Wow.
Okay.
Get pitching.
All right.
What made you want to write it?
Well, so I think that without sounding too grandiose, I sort of feel like this was a book that I was destined to write. I was always going to write it because of the way that I came into feminism, which was basically about discovering male default and the gender data gap in my own head. So growing up, I was absolutely not a feminist. And for those of you who were, like me, a teenager in the 90s, you may remember how very much it was not okay to be a feminist in the 90s. You know, the one thing, and I didn't really know anything about feminism. The only thing I knew about feminism was that I was not one. And it was very bad, and it was sort of embarrassing. You know, felt the whole thing was embarrassing. And I kind of thought that, you know, I bought into the stereotypes about women, that women are sort of trivial and over-emotional and shallow and consumerist and not interested in anything serious and can't really hold their own in a debate. But we were different, and I say me and my friends. And I say that because we actually discussed this, how women are just a bit crap, but we're more like men, so we're great. I know, but it's important that we admit these things. So I went through my teens and early 20s just sort of buying into this myth and just hoping that people would realize that I'm not like other girls and therefore deserve to be treated like a human being. But you can treat them as the stupid idiots that they are, because obviously they are, otherwise women would be doing better. Anyway, then I went to university as a mature student, and I was 25, and for the first time I had to read a book that was about feminism.
I thought you were going to stop there.
Yeah, I was studying English,
right, okay.
And I'd never read a book before, but they let me in anyway. It was outreach. Yeah, so I read a book on feminism, and it was called Feminism and Linguistic Theory, which is in fact a cracking read.
That's Deborah Cameron's book, right?
It is Deborah Cameron's book.
It's a great book.
Debbie Cameron made me a feminist. She is to blame for me. Yeah, so it was this section on gendered language. Well, obviously the whole book was about gendered language, and this was about male default in language. And again, this was something I had actually heard that feminists complain about, using he to mean he or she, or man to mean humankind. But, you know, I think like a lot of people when they hear that, because they don't necessarily understand the sort of structures around it, I just thought, well, here we go again. Here's another trivial, idiotic thing that the feminists are getting all het up about. Everyone knows it means he or she. Haven't they got a real problem to worry about? Anyway, so I read this, and obviously was rolling my eyes, and then saw the next line, which said, but when women read or hear these words, they picture a man. And I'd never been told that before.
I think one of the examples that she gives is that if it were truly gender neutral, then the phrase, man is the only animal which has difficulty giving birth, ought not to sound completely wacko, which it does. Right. And the fact is that you don't think humans, you think men. Yes. Right? Or doctor. Yeah. Even though now the majority of undergraduates in medical schools are female, we still think...
But you still picture a man.
Yeah, what's that great anecdote about someone, you know, there's a story where it says, how can this happen? That a patient gets taken in.
The patient gets taken in, and...
The doctor says, I can't operate.
This
is us doing jokes now.
It's a son and a parent? Do they say, the son and a father, and then they take them in, and the surgeon says, I can't operate on this man, this is my son. How could that be? Yeah. And actually, I remember doing that lateral thinking puzzle when I was a kid, because we had a book of fun, wacky lateral thinking puzzles for car rides. And This was the 90s, guys.
There was no internet,
There were no
yeah.
iPads.
Yeah.
We had lateral thinking puzzles. Anyway, and I do remember us really sort of going, what could it be? Like, do you think were they gay? What? How did this happen? Is it actually his uncle? Anyway, so
I think it's extraordinary that even by the time you get to the 90s, so I've been spending a lot of time with second wave feminism in the 70s, and this way that those assumptions woven into language were also woven into law. So there's some really crazy things that were 50 years ago in the law of this country. So for example, there was such a thing as an au pair girl visa, in which if you were a rich family, you could bring over an au pair girl. No mention of au pair boys, obviously, that's not a thing that happened. Men could bring over a dependent spouse. Women couldn't, because it was not written into law. There was no assumption that what woman has a dependent spouse, so who would ever need to bring someone over? So all of this was just like woven into the very structure and fabric of our society.
No, I'm not writing a message to you.
Right.
I just, like,
Help,
you reminded me
let
of
me
this amazing thing that, there are two things that you reminded me of, and I've forgotten one of them now. You should stop being interesting. Someone on Twitter the other day sent me this screen grab of a thesis about Simone de Beauvoir, saying philosopher, writer, but it's in the masculine form.
Écrivain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, so I knew that for generic masculine in French and Spanish, that if it's a group of people and you don't know what the gender is, the default is masculine. But I didn't know that there was this whole thing that they argue against using the feminine form of writer and philosopher, because I don't know why, actually. But then she also told me that there's no male word for housewife in French. Anyway, so I discovered this thing, and I just was so, it just blew my mind, basically, because first of all, I realized, oh my God, I am picturing a man when I hear these words. But more importantly, I just thought, how have I never noticed this? I was 25 by this point. I'd been picturing men for 25 years and had never noticed that I was doing it. And, you know, as you say, I then started thinking, well, actually, this is what I do when I picture a lawyer or a doctor or a politician,
professor,
or a journalist, anyone who occupies any kind of position in society that I respect and that I aspire to and that I can see garners respect from society. I'm picturing a man. And first of all, well, I was very, very shocked. And then I started thinking, could this be related to the way that I think women are just crap, despite not knowing any women that fit into this ridiculous box? And then I started to get really angry. And that rage has powered me through. But I think that because that's the way I came into feminism, that's the feminism that I've always ended up doing. So, you know, I don't pick my campaigns. People often ask me, like, what's your next campaign going to be? And I genuinely don't know, because it needs something to piss me off. And the thing that pisses me off is when I see women being written out for no bloody good reason. Oh, there's never a bloody good reason. But, you know, particularly with the banknotes and the statue, you know, the banknotes, you know, there's just this ridiculous, like, what the, why did they do that? You know, it was just complete madness to replace the only female historical figure with a man. You know, this was 2012, 2013, I don't know. 21st century, though. We've known women exist for a while by this point. And it was just staggering to me that they hadn't noticed they were going to have an all-male lineup. And similarly, when I went for the run and went through Parliament Square and noticed that all the statues were of men, I was just gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe in this incredibly high-profile square, you know, the most significant one politically, where all the protests take place and where politicians are walking past it every day and where tourists come and, you know, see who we consider to be the great people who have contributed to politics, and they're all men. And I thought that was absolutely staggering. And so with the book, I think that it was something that had been in Genesis. Sorry, I know I'm going on, so feel free to interrupt me. But otherwise, I'll just carry on going.
Forever.
Well, I still haven't remembered the thing I wanted to say. So I think it's just that I started noticing these things. So I did an MSc after my undergrad, and I studied feminist economics and behavioral economics, and there I discovered that's male default again, you know, and they literally call it, you know, Homo economicus. And the way that the economy is designed around men. I just thought, well, this is bullshit. How has this happened? And then I discovered that asylum seeker policy is also based around male lives. So it's much harder for a female asylum seeker to manage to claim asylum because the tick boxes that you have to be able to fill in order to prove that you are a what's the word?
A sort of genuine claimant.
Yeah, thank you. Are based around the reasons that men are persecuted. But they don't include anything. I mean, gender isn't one of the boxes.
Which also applies to things like the WASPy women, right? For example, or women who took time out of the workplace to do caring responsibilities, who haven't built up enough national insurance contributions to then get their full pension entitlement. Right? All of these things that are based around still this idea of a male breadwinner, female homemaker, when very few people cleave to that model. And one of the things that I was reading recently was Rutger Bregman's book about Rutger Bregman, who's wrote a book called Her Utopia for Realists, and it talks about the same stuff you talk about GDP. So we have this economic measurement.
Is that the Davos guy?
Yes.
That guy.
Yeah.
I really fancy that guy.
Well, then you'll
love a socialist economist.
You'll love my podcast with him. Imagine your excitement.
Can I come on, please?
But he talks about it from not. I mean, it's not a feminist book, but it has a feminist point to it, which is the point that someone like Mariana Mazzucati, the economist, will make. When a man marries his housekeeper, GDP falls. Right? This great line, because actually, what is predominantly female caring labour, unpaid labour in the home? It is this massive, massive bung to capitalism, which totally cooks the books and makes everything look much more efficient than it is. And also, I saw Sarah Connor of the FT talking about this today. We talk about unskilled labour in care homes, and she says, well, look, all this talk we have about automation, it is much easier, realistically, for an AI to take over the job of an accountant than it is to take over the job of a care worker. So really, what's unskilled? Like, it's just that the skill of going into someone's home who's lonely and afraid and needs their bedding changed, all of that stuff, we call that unskilled, and it's not. And we should start talking about those jobs as being automation-proof jobs, because then maybe economists will give a shit.
That is very interesting. Well, I mean, on the topic of sort of similar topic, so one of the issues with the economy is that we don't measure women's unpaid care work, and that has huge repercussions for how we design the workplace, how we allocate resources, how we decide what needs to get cut. And when they were originally deciding on GDP, they did actually recognize that unpaid care work was part of the economy. Like, that's never been the argument. It's not that it's not part of the economy. But they had, and it was, men having this discussion. And they ultimately decided, well, it's just too complicated. So, which is just completely bonkers when you think about it, because you're basically saying the whole point of GDP and measuring the economy was to have an accurate measurement of what the hell was going on. And they just decided, well, but reality is too complicated. And it's staggering, actually, how often this comes up when we're talking about measuring women. Women are just too complicated. Our bodies are too complicated, our travel patterns are too complicated, our working lives are too complicated, just too damn complicated. So let's just not measure them and pretend that only men exist, which makes so much sense. Anyway.
That makes me feel very, very bad, because the whole premise of my book is about women being difficult, and actually one of the ways that I haven't, and now think, shit, maybe I should have done, is about that exact point, about the idea that when you have the second sex, you have these people who have a very linear life, that everything's tailored around them, it's written about, and then these other lives are seen as being...
Put it in your conclusion.
Maybe,
that's where you put all the ideas.
P.S. I had some other ideas.
That's what the conclusion's for.
But also,
I had this amazing thing that I so wanted to get it in the book, and it just wouldn't fucking fit anywhere. And a friend actually suggested just put it in on one page and say, this doesn't fit in anywhere, but you can see why I had to include it. Anyway, I managed to include it in the conclusion. And it's basically Le Corbusier, who was this very influential Swiss architect, came up with the human scale. You can probably see where this is going, for architecture. And the idea that architecture should, fit humans. And it's very, exciting, challenging way of thinking about buildings, except, of course, for the human being represented by a 6-foot man. Actually, interestingly enough, he specified a 6-foot British police detective, which I find really weird. I mean, that's just like a level of detail that I don't think anyone really needs.
I just love his idea that people are kind of walking through door frames going, hello, what's up here?
Who just thought that was like the absolute, that's the top type of person. That's as good as humanity's going to get, a 6-foot British police detective. And apparently they did consider, so that's called modular man, and they did consider doing modular woman, but decided that the female form was, what was it? It was like, too unharmonious. So,
speak for yourself.
To use for architecture. So that's women being too complicated again. But that reminds me, you were saying about how man, it never actually has been gender neutral. And actually, when in the fight for women's votes, as you will definitely know, the first attempt to give women the vote was when John Stuart Mill tried to do this very, very clever...
He tried to change the Great Reform Act, which said to vote...
it said man, and he tried to change it to person.
Person, and then because accidentally one woman voted in a local election.
Yeah.
Sort of sneaked through, and then everyone got very upset about it.
But I mean, it just sort of really shows what a load of bullshit this has always been. It's never been gender neutral. It's always actually meant men. It's only belatedly we've tried to pretend that, we also mean women too, obviously. Anyway, to return to my story.
Yes.
So I had all these sort of the rage building up, and then when I was researching my first book, I came across these 3 things that I just blew my top, basically. So the first one was about heart attacks, and discovering that the heart attack symptoms that I had always thought, and I think most people have always thought, are the heart attack symptoms. So, if you're having pain in your chest and down your left arm, you get yourself to the hospital. It turns out those are male heart attack symptoms. And women are much more likely to experience nausea, fatigue, what feels like indigestion. And so because public health information presents typical male symptoms as these symptoms, women don't realize they're having a heart attack, so they don't go to hospital. But then, even more shockingly, even if they do go to hospital, they're not being diagnosed with a heart attack because doctors aren't recognizing it either. And then, even more shockingly, even for the 1 in 8 women who do experience chest pain, the diagnostic tests that we've developed are around what a male heart attack looks like mechanically as well. So, the main test is looking for blockages. And then it turns out that female heart attacks may not present with blockages in the same way. So even the women who do manage to fit into this male symptom standard are being sent home with undiagnosed chest pain after having suffered from a heart attack, which is why, altogether, women are more likely to die following a heart attack than men. So I discovered that, and I was very cross about that. This was 2014. I just thought, how is it possible that I knew we had a sexism problem. I knew that women were underrepresented in culture, in media, in politics. The idea that this was also happening in medicine, the one place that you would think does actually take into account female bodies. And so there was that. And then I discovered at the same time, and because it was that year, in fact, in 2013, the FDA had to tell women to cut their dosage of this sleeping pill called Ambien in half, because it turned out the female body was metabolizing the active ingredient twice as slowly as men. And so women were going to work the next day after having taken the sleeping pill under the influence, and a lot of women were crashing their cars. And then the third thing I discovered was that we're just not testing drugs in women, or in female animals, or in female cells. And I read this paper. I happened to come across this paper that I think, well, I don't know if I happened to come across it. I think by that point I was so pissed off about the Ambien and the heart thing, I started looking into it, and came across this paper that was a sort of longitudinal analysis of what are we doing with animal studies. And basically what we're doing in animal studies is studying male animals. And it turns out that that really matters. I didn't discover this before writing the book, but while writing the book, I came across this, this discovery that was made where the gold standard for, I think it's survivorship following some kind of cardiac event, which is related to circadian rhythms. I can't remember the exact thing. Buy the book if you want to find out the full details. But anyway, the point is, there was the gold standard of survivorship based on circadian rhythms. And then this research team came up with this totally opposite finding. And everyone was baffled. And they were just like, how is this, what's going on? Turns out that team used female mice. And everyone else had used male mice, but no one had bothered to note that that's what they were doing. Anyway, that's why I wrote this book, Helen.
I wish I'd never asked. No, it's really interesting to go back, and I think it's always interesting to hear stories from people about what it was that made them into a feminist, because I had the same experience. I grew up in a small city in the Midlands, in Worcester. You know, I didn't know anyone, I think, who would have identified themselves as a feminist. But I remember already by then, so my parents are religious, they're Catholic, so I was raised in the Catholic Church. And I remember one particular car journey, this is a testament to what an annoying child I was, when I said, why in the church does it always refer to God as he? So Jesus, a man, fair enough, Holy Spirit. I said, you know, does God the Father have a penis and testicles, Mum? Like the unbearable 11-year-old that I was. And it's true, because
wait, what did she say? You can't finish the anecdote like that.
I think she probably put the ABBA record up higher, which is what she normally did when I annoyed her in the car. But I
made some lateral thinking puzzles.
Exactly. She handed out the logic puzzles. But I went to a local Methodist church that a friend of mine was in, and they said, you know, God, the Father and Mother. And I was just like, what is this crazy radicalism that's happening here? But this idea that you would take a being that, you know, even within the Catholic Church has, you know, if you talk about the Trinity, the two bits of it do not have any corporeal form, but that's got to be he. It's got to be he. It's got to be he. It's a man. It's a bloke.
Men are very important, Helen.
That's true, and they do a lot of smiting.
They're very powerful.
That's what I learned from the Bible. But I think, so for the same thing for you, Debbie Cameron's work on language was really transformative, and obviously I now work with language.
So Debbie Cameron's to blame for
both of us, yeah. It's literally her fault.
Everyone.
And also something like Ariel Levy's Female Chauvinist Pigs, because I think when it's really interesting now, I don't know, I really romanticise the 90s, because I think, it's when Britpop happened, and, you know...
Britpop was shit.
Let's have that argument later.
Buy my book. I did fancy Damon Albarn, though, but his music was shit. Sorry.
Let's park that for a moment. But now, looking back on it, you know, I think it was astonishing, that era of kind of lads' mags and wahey, and exactly that idea that you were talking about, which was that to be like, I'm not the dowdy, sexless feminist, I'm well up for it, and actually that's incredibly empowered.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what could be the most empowered thing of all. Oh, you're getting my top off.
I mean, I think that is... Well, I don't know, but for me, that was why I loved the cool girl bit in Gone Girl so much, because it just described growing up in the 90s, and that idea of what an empowered, independent, sassy woman was like, and actually it was just this completely subservient to male desire woman pretending to be.
And it has this bit about her eating, you know, like, she'll eat 8 hot dogs, but always stays a size 8.
Yeah.
It was this idea that you
we were like that.
had
we
to
pretended
be
to eat like all this crap, and actually, you know, because also the thing about the 90s was bloody crop tops and low jeans. You know, it was a nightmare. You weren't eating 8 hot dogs.
I was. It was the second bit that I struggled with. But I do think that's so, but that idea that you had to be both really sexy and really available, but also that you had to not show that there's any effort. And I think that's something that recurs in lots of different domains for women, that you have to put a lot of work into it, but you must never show that it's work. Because it's not real work, not like being in a factory. Like, it's not, you know, all that stuff, like you must keep the beautiful home, but not moan about it, because that's boring. And I think that, you know, when you look back at the legacy of things like, I was reading the work of Selma James or Betty Friedan, you know, that idea about the fact that there were lots of women who were at home all day with children, and their partner came home and didn't, as Selma James writes about this, saying your male partner comes home and he's been tired, he's been out all day, he doesn't want to talk about anything. You've been stuck at home all day, or all you want to do is talk, you're desperate for some companionship, you feel isolated and alone. And I think that's a real strain that kind of comes through that generation of feminists. And it's when people talk about the fact about, you know, the choice to stay at home, which I think is a valid choice if people want to do that. But for that whole generation, they experienced that choice as isolation because they weren't living in big extended family communities. They were living in nuclear families in cities that maybe that, they didn't have any family in. And they felt so terribly alone because they didn't have the support structure of work.
But it's also, we're so dishonest about what it means. Because it's not represented as work, and you still will have people thinking that women who make the choice to stay at home are just sort of putting their feet up all day, just like having a laugh, probably drinking some lager. No, well, they wouldn't do that, it's unladylike. But and then the reality kicks in, and when you become, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but my friends who have had children and become mothers, and just the absolute sheer grind of it, of pregnancy, and then of the childbirth, and then of the child rearing, and the lack of sleep, and the dullness of it, and we don't talk about it. And I don't really know why that is. There's some kind of weird conspiracy about, tied up with things like, I don't know, women perhaps worrying it makes them sound like they don't love their children, perhaps sounding like you're not a good enough mother.
I think the model of the selfless mother has got a lot to answer for. The idea that, if you just loved them, you wouldn't mind doing all that stuff. And it's like, I love my job. That doesn't stop me bitching about it occasionally. and that's a natural thing. There's a great quote which I used to, which is like, oh, you hate your job. There's a support group for that. It's called Everyone, and they meet at the bar. And
but Helen, you haven't experienced the true love of having a child.
But why wouldn't? But
so
why?
How could you possibly know about love?
And I think when I talk to people I remember talking to a guy who'd gone back to work, and he was like, I love being at work. I can just close the door and it's quiet. And I think that's one of the things when I interviewed.
That's why I love being an aunt.
Right, but I interviewed Ali Hochschild, who wrote a very influential book called The Second Shift, which was about this idea that when women were moving into the workplace, they still hadn't worked out, therefore, how to equalise the second shift that needed to be done. So they were both working full-time jobs there. This was heterosexual couples with 2 children she studied. But there was still this extra work to do, and how were couples working at the sharing out? And one of the things that she found then, luckily it's shifted since a bit, is that actually the stuff that the men were doing was like, I'll tidy the shed, I'll do the dishes when I want to. The stuff that the women were doing was like making the dinner for the child, that if the dinner is not there, the child is going to be extremely unhappy. Like it was the stuff that
eventually die.
Right. Yeah, but
Maybe
how long you
step in at
yeah, I feel like about 10 p.m. probably you might crack. But it was a really interesting thing, and I think it speaks to how we think about children and responsibility, that ultimately they are a woman's responsibility still.
It actually has not changed that much. If you look at, the global spread, and I'm, including all sorts of countries, including the UK and the US. For example, men have 5 more hours of leisure per week in the UK and the US than women. A Michigan study found that husbands, this is my favorite study, husbands create 7 hours of extra housework a week for their wives. I'm like, what are you guys doing? I don't understand. I don't create 7 hours a week of housework for myself. It's baffling. But study after study after study shows that while, obviously it has got a bit better, but women are still doing the overwhelming majority of it. Plus also there's that amazing cartoon that I'm sure a lot of you have seen about the mental load. So that even if you manage to find a man who understands what 50-50 means, meant to be good at maths, I don't know what's wrong with them. Anyway, sorry, that was a cheap shot. So even if you have that, basically women are the managers of the household, and managers normally get pay rises.
I think that was really interesting, and that must be quite eye-opening to a lot of people, was that idea that, that you're still the one who's expected to be in charge of remembering everyone in the family's birthdays. You're the one who's supposed to be in charge of knowing whether or not the kid's on a school trip and therefore need a different packed lunch. Like that constant whirring tick in the brain. And the studies also suggest that even when both parents are present, I'm talking about straight couples here, then actually what tends to happen is one of them is the supervisory parent, which means you're basically massively in charge of whether or not your child is putting their fingers in the plug sockets, versus do you kind of go in and do a bit of like choo 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 fun, low level fun. I mean, I enjoy that stuff, but then I think that it more often falls to the women to be the supervisory parent, and I think the problem with that is that it's set very early on. through maternity
the study
leave.
Absolutely. The study that looked at, the type of work that was being done was showing that, even when men, hashtag not all men, genuinely, I'm sure all the men here are great. But
they're a bit of a self-selecting sample, aren't they? Those men who've come to a feminist event.
Well, some of them may have been dragged along. I don't want to make any assumptions. Anyway, so they found that men tended to skim off the more fun bits. So they weren't doing the housework, they were doing the childcare. And by childcare, they weren't doing the feeding and the nappy changing. They were doing I'll keep an eye on you while I play with my Xbox.
I was going to say, that great classic dad thing of like, we've built a model railway set that you love. Get your hands off it. Which is a favourite. But I think it's really interesting
that happened to you.
No, I know lots of dads like that though, who've got suspicious hobbies that are for the children. Okay, but the thing about that is, I think there are lots of dads who would like to be a lot more involved. Yeah. I think the fact that paternity leave is still so recent is absolutely mind-boggling to me, and it's still so short.
Well, that's the issue. Is it's actually encoded into our law that women are the primary caregiver, and I've never been able to track this study down, and it frustrates me so much. If anyone finds it. I've tried Googling so hard, but I remember... Oh, I thought you were going to take a note. No. I'll just get this for Caroline.
Yeah.
So I heard it, and it was on the Today programme, and this researcher was being interviewed about her study, which looked at, are women actually innately, biologically better at changing nappies? And it turns
Smaller
out...
hands, Caroline. That's how it would be.
Well, but better grip strength for men.
Would you have to grip a nappy? I mean, what do you do?
Hold the baby, something. Right. I don't know. I've never changed a nappy. Anyway, so I'm sure I'd be great at it. And they found that it wasn't that when they, so this was straight couples as well. When the baby first came home from the hospital, neither of them was very good at changing the nappy. But basically, the women got better because they kept doing it. So they learnt how to. And so by the time child number 2 comes along, well, she's much better. She's just really, really good at changing nappies. Like, I don't know, she's got this special talent. So that was a really fascinating study, but I've never been able to find it. It was just, so if anyone finds it.
I think it's one of the really interesting things about talking.
And then the researcher is here.
Yeah, she's here tonight. But it's one of the really interesting things when you talk to gay couples about how they, with children, about how because they're just starting from scratch. So they've actually worked it out, and it often ends up being much more about aptitude or about what people actually want, having that honest discussion about how are we going to make this work? Like, what do you like? What makes you happy? What are you better at? What am I better at?
Has someone done a study on...
yeah, lesbians are much better at sharing housework.
No, but what about gay men?
I haven't seen that. That would be really interesting. Would be really interesting. But the point about it is that that shows the model that we can all, unless you're a person who believes in incredibly strong innate sex differences, which
in which case, why are you here?
Right.
Really?
Which I kind of
Wrong crowd.
Yes, the Jordan Peterson talk is down the hall. But then, but I mean, nappy changing, come on, it's not like there's some, it's not like estrogen is associated with being able to fold nappies. Like,
in fact, I'd be interested to hear Jordan Peterson's thoughts on this, because doesn't he subscribe to the idea that men have these sort of logical pattern shape, seeing brains, and isn't doing a nappy like, you've got to fit the thing in the... Again, I've never changed a nappy,
right.
So, but,
let's be kind and say you're thinking about very like cloth origami nappies. Apparently, is what you're thinking of.
I've seen my brother, in fact, and my sister-in-law changing nappies, and I'm sure you.
I think you need to go home and volunteer to change one of those nappies. I think you're a bad aunt, is what I'm getting from this.
Well, they're out of nappies now, so
right.
It's fine.
Okay, fine. But no, I think that in the case of Peterson, I think probably he's relying on some of that Simon Baron-Cohen idea of men with systematizing brains and women having empathetic brains, although I've never heard him mention having read those books.
So you're saying nappies are not related to systematizing at all?
Well, that's what, but then this is what I mean, is it's a bit like the IQ test, right, where they kind of go, actually, if you look at a population level, men do better on an IQ test, and you go, what is an IQ test measuring? It's not measuring success in life, it's not measuring...
You've misunderstood me. I'm not saying that I am buying into this bullshit. I'm just saying it would be quite funny to ask... No, but I'm saying, can you troll Jordan Peterson for us again? Have you guys seen her interview with him? Because if you haven't, you've got a massive treat in store.
There's a bit when he starts talking about roving bands of tyrannical plumbers, which is just amazing.
I don't remember that bit. And I do remember him looking like he was going to eat you.
Yeah. Well, there's a bit when he says that he doesn't believe that a patriarchy has ever existed, which is a much less defensible proposition than saying that one doesn't currently exist now in the West for very educated women, blah, 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 blah. He says flat out patriarchy doesn't exist. And I say, why do women change their surnames on marriage then? And honestly, there was it was like clouds passing across the sky. Just like... And then, yeah, but the answer is that it was regarded as a property transfer. Women, there were two categories of women until the Married Women's Property Act, femme sole and femme covert, so covered woman. So either somebody who is looked after by their father, their husband, their eldest son, you know, whatever it might be, which is now this guardianship system that persists in Saudi Arabia. This was the model of what women belonged to someone, and through their lives they moved through stages of belonging to a different person. And it was only 1880, the Married Women's Property Act, that women got the right to own property themselves, make contracts for themselves, be sued in their own right. All of these things are incredibly, incredibly recent. You know, women as full legal entities in the law doesn't really arise until the end of the 19th century. I'm going to start doing bits of my book, so stop me. Stop me, Caroline.
No, that's fine, I can take a break.
As it's a Fawcett Society, I want to talk to you about the state of feminism today. How healthy do you think it is? What are its biggest challenges right now?
Oh, for fuck's sake, Helen.
It's a legitimate question.
I know, but it's quite a big one. What was the question? Why?
How healthy is feminism today?
How healthy is feminism today? Well, I mean, we're clearly in a period of backlash, so that's not great.
What makes you say that?
Well, your good friend Jordan gaining such ascendancy. You know, well, there just is a rise in angry man syndrome, which I've personally experienced, of being sent loads and loads of rape and death threats because I campaigned for a drawing of a woman on a banknote, which is obviously a terrible thing to do, and it wasn't in any way a massively over-emotional overreaction from those men. You know, but I mean, I think that backlash comes from a place of fear. And I think that the problem that we have to a certain extent is that while we have made some strides in sort of expanding what women can be, what a successful woman looks like, obviously we've still got a long way to go, and there's a lot of barriers in place, not least sort of social ones, but you know, we've made some progress there. There's no denying that. We haven't really redefined what it means to be a successful man. And so for these men, and I think that they are men who probably, I mean, I'm psychoanalyzing here and I'm not at all qualified to do that, but this is what makes sense to me. Men who feel sort of threatened in their masculinity see these very meager incursions that women have made into the public space, which has historically been seen as a male space, as an existential threat, because we've not given men anything else. And that's partly because, kind of like why women can wear trousers and men can't wear skirts, for women to expand what it means to be a woman is only to move up. Whereas, because everything that's associated with women, like care work and being caring, is seen as lesser, as, you know, a step down for men, it's much harder to see how to represent that as something positive for men. Of course, it is positive for men. You know, one of the things that men who hate feminists often will bring up is things like suicide rates amongst men. Well, feminism is a really good way of dealing with that, because, you know, part of feminism is talking about sort of rehabilitating all these things that we have sort of pushed onto women because they are seen as lesser, but actually are a very important part of the human condition. You know, loving your kids does not make you a lesser man. It makes you a better man. It makes you a man who is in touch with his full humanity. But the type of manhood that we promote as a society is basically, you know, it's a sociopath, really.
I think there was a really interesting
example. But it really is. It's denying men the ability to care and have emotions. Yeah. That is a sociopath. You know, that is what we're saying a successful man is.
There was an interesting example today from...
there's a backlash, because they don't, you know, they can't see how else to be.
In Pakistan today, Imran Khan, who's now leader of the PTI and leader, called his political opponent the Urdu word that means madam. So which is intended to demean him, right? And this idea, like, I don't really like all that stuff of putting Putin in lipstick, as it's intended to be this kind of slightly demeaning thing, because it would be to be like a woman. But I totally agree, and I actually think it's a bit of a challenge to the feminist movement, and I can't believe that, you know, there is a resistance, I think. I feel it totally, because first of all, it gets thrown at you so often as a derailing tactic. Why don't you care about X? From people who don't care about X themselves, they just want to stop you talking about Y. But also I think that there's a sense that feminism is not everyone's mum. And it can't. I think when people kind of say, well, why doesn't feminists have anything to say about the environment? You kind of think, well, that's sort of environmentalism's job. Like, you know, we're just doing women for the moment, thanks, guys. Just got quite a lot on our plate over here. But I do think that
feminists have quite a lot to say about the environment, because environmentalism is clearly a feminist issue, because women are most impacted by climate change.
But it's the same way that people will say, why aren't you talking about FGM when you're talking about the pay gap, right? And it's not because they care about FGM, it's because they don't want you to talk about the pay gap.
I just wanted to be pedantic.
Okay. That's always allowed. It's always encouraged. But I also think that there is a sense that we have to not be defensive about, in good faith, talking about men and the way that the change in women's roles will necessarily mean a change in men's roles. Because it's not like we'll finish feminism and go, right, good done, right, men, what's up with you?
But also, you know, it's like that Andrea Dworkin quotation that you very kindly gave me once about how women are the only oppressed group that share a bed with their oppressors. You know,
hashtag not all women.
Hashtag not all women. But, you know, a lot of women love a lot of men. You know, they are our brothers and a lot of men, you know, not just socialist economists, other men too. So, you know, brothers, fathers, lovers, and so it's sort of inevitable that you're going to want to, you know, I care about my nephews. I want them to have a good, happy life. And like my nephew at the moment is just so adorable, so sweet and kind and thoughtful. He's 3. And, you know, I'm so scared for him growing up. What's this really sweet, lovely, thoughtful, gentle boy going to do when he gets into, you know, a serious school? You know, as in like an older person's school. I don't know what they're all called, but, you know, it's no longer nursery.
Right, and he's no longer just allowed to wear his Princess Elsa dress that he loves, and he's told that if he doesn't like football, then he must be gay, and that's a bad thing.
And I just am so frightened for him. And so, of course, we're going to care about that. So I think it is really important that we engage with that. But I mean, so similarly, this is something that I sort of feel about the book, is that any man who cares about any woman in his life will get the argument of this book. Because basically the argument of this book, at its, you know, when you come down to it, yes, women are being inconvenienced, yes, it's unfair, yes, women are being made poorer, etc. But in a number of cases, women are dying. You know, and who wants their mum to get into a car and you get into a crash and she dies and you don't because the car isn't designed for women? Who wants their mum to die from a heart attack because we don't know what female heart attack symptoms look like, and we haven't developed treatment for how female heart attacks progress mechanically? Nobody wants that. So, you know, while women can and should care about how to redefine masculinity, men should care, and I think will care, about closing the gender data gap, because they all, you know, you don't share a bed with all the women. You share a bed with some of them, and some of them are your mum, and some of them are your sister, and, you know, so... That's all. Hug and enjoy life.
That's a nice optimistic note, I think, to go to questions. Have we got a roving mic in the audience, or are you going to have to? No, we have. Look at that, and then I can always bellow it back. I normally say I want to take a question from a woman first.
I mean,
but it's going to be quite a challenge not to. Can I tempt anyone to a cheeky question? Go on there.
Oh, I see. There's 2 mics.
And is there one on this side so I can get you a mic? You terrified me. Terrified them into submission. Oh, we'll get that mic to you. Brilliant.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for this. It's fantastic. My question is about when you are talking about all these issues with men, particularly men who are on side, like Caroline, I heard you yesterday with James O'Brien on LBC, and he's a great guy. I love listening to him. He's very woke. I hate that word, but...
he's very...
Woke.
Woke. So woke.
Yeah. I guess my question is, like, when I was listening to you, I had a quick look at the schedule, and I did tweet this actually, but like LBC, which I listen to a lot, this whole week, because Sheila Fogarty's away, there's not a single woman presenter on the whole week. And actually, Monday, every weekday, it's a white man as well, not even, non-white man. And I guess my question to you is, when you're sitting with somebody like James O'Brien who gets it, how can you bring up the other stuff that's just around you right there and then? I mean, you're talking about brothers and fathers and what have you. I love my brothers and I've got nephews and what have you, but I bring this stuff up and they're not quite there because they don't really, it's slightly roll eye moment. It's like, oh, God, all right.
I mean, don't get me wrong, men are twats.
No, I mean, or even,
we're doing so well.
I guess it's like where's the line for you two about, trying to be persuasive and say, do you want mum to be killed in a crash at car and, never getting invited to things again, because you're just going on about it the whole time. So that's my question.
I think you have to do a couple of different things, right? First of all, you have to assume good faith. And I think it's really hard when you're a feminist, when you're a public feminist, even when you're anybody who self-identifies as a feminist might get... Because I get my family give me little digs about, oh, you won't like that, but of course you hate high heels. And you go, well, I do, yes. I mean, bang to rights on that one. But, you can get incredibly defensive because you're bored by the same things coming up and over again, right? And I think that's really tough to try and remember that this might be your 19th time answering something, but actually it might be someone's first time answering it. And your response will be either the thing that makes them think, oh, well, she was quite nice, maybe I've got feminists all wrong, versus what a load of old cows they are, we're not going to go anywhere near that. And it can be really hard because I think a lot of the times that innocence can look like people being deliberately dumb and trolling. And I mean, online, it's almost impossible to distinguish someone's tone, right? But I think my rule of thumb is always give them the first answer in good faith. And at worst, you've wasted that time that it took you first to give them that one shot. If they want to be a twat about it after that. Yeah, you're a lot more hardline than I am on this.
I don't really. That was my little joke.
But I agree with you. It's really difficult. And there was a brilliant piece I've been reading in this Guardian anthology of feminism about the women's problem with niceness, right? Which is all the thing that I've been writing about a lot. And saying that the temptation in front of men, because their approval is the good approval, right? Those are the statusy people. If they like you, then you're brilliant. Then it can be very hard and it can make you very coy and very wanting to seek. I mean, I definitely feel like I work in a political journalism which is very male dominated, and those are the power brokers, right? You want to be. There's a great picture of on Time magazine cover of Germaine Greer from 1970, and the headline, picture of her laughing in these massive trousers, and it says "saucy feminist that even men like." And I think there's a real temptation to do that, right? Yeah. To be that, because wouldn't that be cool if you were feminist, but sexy feminist that men liked? And it's really hard not to go in two ways. One is the defensive shutdown, and two is the kind of cloying, please listen to me, go on, then validate me. But yeah, what do you do apart from muting them?
I do what Helen tells me to do.
Always a sensible course in life. But I think the thing is that...
No, but I do agree. It's the reason I'm slightly sort of being a twat about this is that I know I'm just by no means perfect. And I get short-tempered and irritated because, it's the question that I've been asked a million times. And I'm in a bad mood or I'm on my period or whatever it is. And sometimes you're just not able to do the right thing. And the right thing is absolutely to answer the first question in good faith.
But also it's to do with the same thing you would do with any kind of politics, right? Which is talk about people's actual lives. And I think that's really important. Feminist theory is wonderful and brilliant, and I love reading fairly intense levels of feminist theory. But actually, do you know what matters to people is saying, well, what happens in your house? How do you do this? And saying to guys, don't you feel it's a bit, wouldn't you love it if, you didn't have to come home at 9 o'clock and your kids were already in bed? How have we set society up like that? Doesn't, all the ways that that's unfair. And then I think this comes back to the point we were talking about things like male suicide rates about that, is the fact that we should really have to talk about the fact that gender hurts men too. It puts them in a prison. Just as much as it puts women in a prison. And maybe there's a very small subset of men for whom that whole alpha male thing really, really works and they love it and it makes them happy. But not all men by any chance.
Hashtag.
Hashtag not all men. But also to talk as well, I mean, and you're very careful in your book. I mean, there's literally a bit in your book that says that men are not the enemy, right? What we're talking about...
I don't think I said that.
Well, I mean, I think something like that. Anyway, but actually what we're fighting about is a structure. You know, when I'm talking about something like the way I think that the benefit system is set up to be unfair on women, well, that's not my husband didn't do that. Like, my male friends didn't do that. Why shouldn't they? Like, here's this thing that exists. That, you know, are you with me or against me? Not to think that we're on the you know, we're all making a demand on power, right? And actually, then, therefore, you can. It's about who's on my team to do this thing about a structure or an institution or whatever it might be.
To give another slightly more serious answer, to be perfectly honest, my book is basically, in a way, is that. My book is an attempt to explain why feminism matters in a non-emotional way, in a way that will reach as wide an audience as possible, and in a way that isn't about saying that anyone is to blame, that this is about systems, this is about ways of thinking. Because it is, actually. It isn't about people being evil. It is about systems and ways of thinking. And the other thing is, you know, as I said at the beginning, I was not a feminist. I absolutely was not. I was a misogynist. And I read something that changed my mind. And so I firmly believe that people can change their minds. You just need to find the thing that flicks the switch in their head and enables them to see the thing that they hadn't been able to see before. And that's basically what I've tried to do in this book. I want it to be a book that explains to people who've never got feminism before what this whole thing is about.
Where was the microphone? Hello.
Well, you've sort of asked a question coming from a different direction, and you've sort of just answered the question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Psychic.
It was about the feminist backlash when you mentioned that, and I was just thinking, do you not think that the men who even responded so critically and aggressively after your submission regarding the banknotes and whatnot, I think there are a lot of men who are still in the same position, in the same place, as well as women, that you found yourself in. You were not a feminist, and it took actually a single experience in university, a few lines of a book that actually changed your opinion. That suggests that change can come for anybody at any time, and it's how we interact with those people.
Yeah.
In due course and whatnot. But even because you've just answered that, and you have.
Are you going to try and get a cheeky bonus question? Is that where it's going?
I am, because there was something else. There was also something else that occurred to me, because I speak to a lot of men and women about this, and you mentioned about the household duties and whatnot. But you know, most of my female friends who are mothers, and I'm friends with women and men of all ages, and women become very territorial over housework. And in fact, when husbands do try to help, often it's not done to the standard the women like.
Well, isn't that a problem with the men being shit at it?
No, I really sympathise with it, because my dishwasher loading does not come up to scratch in my household, and the dishwasher is reloaded.
Helen,
well, no, it's
load
great.
the dishwasher better.
No, because now I don't have to load the dishwasher, because I can't.
But there you go.
Yeah, but I'm turning their own tactics back on them, Caroline.
Right,
it's magic.
I think it just suggests, however, that women need to be more compromising in our approach, as much as men have to be willing to unlearn what they have been taught and what has become a social norm.
I'm not 100% convinced of that when it comes to housework, because I think that there is just a level of cleanliness that just it needs to happen. And it seems to me that men who don't do that are just I think they're doing it on purpose. And I think they're infantilizing themselves. Because, no, and I'll tell you why. No, don't worry, I've got her. So I read this article that enraged me. I'm still angry about it 2 years later. And this woman writing kind of about that stupid line of, oh, well, men they don't see mess in the same way. Oh, bless them, aren't they sweet? And she gave this anecdote of her boyfriend, who she had said, please will you wash up your cereal bowl? So for a start, why does she have to tell him that? But anyway, she said, please wash up your cereal bowl. So he washed up the bowl, but not the spoon. And she told the story of, bless him.
What a legend.
He didn't realise that he had to wash up the spoon. Lol, aren't men funny? And it was No, they're not. This man does not respect you. He's
Right.
taking the fucking piss. Because he knows. He used that spoon, and he knows it needs to be washed. But when it comes to childcare... Shut up, Helen.
Okay.
When it comes to childcare, I think that there is an issue there. But I think that that is much, much more complicated. I don't think it's necessarily about women thinking that, that they do it better or men don't do it well enough. I think it's because there's so much pressure on women to be the perfect mother and to be the primary caregiver that there's something wrong if the child chooses daddy over mummy. There are women who will feel that they failed as a mother as a result of that, because we are so used to thinking mummy is the one, mummy is the most important one. And that, I think, is a big problem. There are lots of things that need to be done to solve that, paternity leave being one of them.
I agree with you, and I think it's about where you seek status, and we're taught to see that the home is the female domain, and therefore it reflects badly on the woman, and therefore she should be primarily in charge of it. But I also think we should stop indulging, and as much as I hate stupid, sexy women draped over car bullshit adverts, I hate that trend of infantilizing men. I had a colleague who took paternity leave, 3 months, had 2 young children, and we joked that when he came back he should write a column about it, but the column that he should write was called Competent Dad, right? And it would be like, my wife left me at home with our 2 small children. She returned 8 hours later. Everything was fine. Because there is that whole genre of being encouraged that it's so funny, like, oh, and then the walls got smeared with porridge, like, what am I like? and it's as unfunny as like, oh, I'm an Essex girl, I can't put on lipstick and drive a car. It's like this bullshit, outdated stereotype about men's incompetence that is not, that for some reason, I think there's a temptation to indulge in it, but it should be taken outside behind the woodshed and shot. Sorry, Poppy. I don't say such things in front of you.
I think she's asleep.
I've always threatened to one day that I will
She's
shoot
heard
Poppy.
all my anecdotes.
But yeah, I agree with you. But I think the status thing is really important because actually it implies in lots of other ways. And actually one of the things I think we were talking about men earlier, about the idea that men's status derives from their control of women is something that we really need to break. There was a really alarming report in The Guardian, long read today, about a gang rape case in Spain. Absolutely astonishing piece about 5 men, and they got convicted of a lesser charge in the end. And one of the things that if you read the scientific literature on gang rape is that it is not really about sex with the woman, it is about the relationships between the men. It's about proving your masculinity in front of each other. And that's one of the most bleak things that I think I can possibly imagine. But it makes a lot of sense. You look at that, the far right sort of discourse about the kind of idea, when you see the phrase about, foreigners are coming in here and raping our women. And it's that same thing of like, guys, they're our women to rape. And that's the problem, right? That's the idea, that's the construction of that. Like, we've got these women penned up. How dare you come in and like usurp our kind of droit de seigneur over these women? And I see that kind of rhetoric all the way through politics in a really nasty way. And you will see that as the whole, we're talking about internet horror, one of the biggest slurs on the old right is the idea of, a cuck. It's a guy who's been cuckolded, right? And the idea that someone's coming in behind your back and sleeping with your woman, that represents a fatal loss of control. And that drives a lot of domestic homicides when a woman is in great danger when she tells her partner that she's been having an affair, because that is a moment where she's likely to experience, most likely in that cycle of that relationship to experience violence, because it is seen as what do you do to avenge what do you do to reassert your lost masculinity is an act of violence. And that conversation about status is a really important one to have, and I think it bleeds into where I think is really interesting that the far right and anti-feminism have ended up in this unholy alliance, sometimes explicitly, like in the case of the Vox Party in Spain, is all about that, like traditional masculinity, traditional gender roles, and traditional whiteness, and then the indigenous population are all coalesced in a feeling of this is how it used to be, can't we get back to that, when everybody knew where they were, and there was a proper rigid hierarchy in society. That was a long ramble, but you had a long ramble at the start, so I'll take one question there, and then one over there. Oh, can you take the microphone all the way over to that side, sorry. Hello.
Hi. Caroline, you spoke about why you wrote your book. I'm just interested in what you want your book to do. Do you want it to add additional powerful arguments to general campaigns on equality, or do you see this opening up a new front in feminism? And if it's opening up a new front, do you think it has implications for how we campaign for equality?
Thank you.
I don't know how to begin to answer that.
Well, first of all, start off by telling us what the response has been, right? So when the first Guardian extract came out, what happened?
I mean, many things happened. I think that the number one, well, there's a number of things that I want from the book. The number one thing I want from the book is I want to change people's minds. That's my main thing. I want to change people's minds who think that none of this matters. The second thing is that I want to make people aware of the fact that we aren't collecting data on women and that women are dying as a result, because people don't know that, and we aren't talking about that. So I want it to start a conversation. And the other thing that I don't think that I had anticipated happening, but which I am so glad is happening, is what started to happen after the article came out, which was I had hundreds of women getting in touch with me expressing massive relief at discovering that there wasn't something wrong with them. It was just that the world hadn't been designed for them. And, you know, that makes me so angry to think that women are going around the world thinking that there's something wrong with them, that they're clumsy, they're the wrong shape. You know, even things like women have to sit further forward in the car to reach the pedals, and it's something that women say that they're laughed at for. You know, I've been laughed at for it by an ex-boyfriend. And I'm still I mean, I really want to, like, I'm not in touch with him anymore, otherwise I'd send him a copy of the fucking book. Fuck you. But, you know, a lot of the things that women do in order to fit into the world, they're ridiculed for. And so this is, you know, a tool for women to fight back against that and say, no, I am not wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not doing this badly. It's not funny that I have to sit further forward to reach the pedals and therefore am more likely to die in a car crash, you absolute wanker.
Still got a lot of rage to work through.
I'm very angry with him.
But I think that's one of the most powerful things that feminism has to offer women, particularly I'm talking about women here, is the sense that you weren't wrong, you weren't being stupid, you weren't like this was
you have nothing to apologise
that this was a real experience that happened to you. Yes, that guy was talking down to you for no reason other than he looked at you and just saw like tea making gender.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So I don't know if it answers your question. I feel like it doesn't answer your question. Don't be so rude. It was a great question. Right. Okay. More answers. Does it open a new front? Well, I mean, no, I don't think so, because it's basically just a reiteration of Simone de Beauvoir, but through data. So I don't think it does open a new front. I think it just fits into what feminists have been saying for a bloody long time, but is showing a new aspect of why this sucks, that men are seen as the default humans. I didn't come up with that. I wish I had. Brilliant. But I didn't come up with that. What I've done is applied it to a new area that obviously lots of people do know about, because the only reason I know about it is because experts in their field have written about it and been researching it. But I wanted to bring it to a wider audience because, you know, when I discovered this, particularly, you know, in medicine and all the other ways in which it's affecting women's health, I was enraged, but also just so shocked that this wasn't just common knowledge. This wasn't something that we all know about and we're all talking about and is on the front page of the newspaper. Yet another woman dies because her heart attack was misdiagnosed. I suppose it wouldn't be, because that would be, man kicks dog?
It would be dog bites man.
Whatever.
Shall I take that question from over there? Yeah, well, you got a microphone, hooray.
Yeah, I've got one, thank you. Hi. I was wondering, you were talking about how we live in a world that just hasn't been designed for us. You know, you look at, we're a stereotypical man and everything is designed to accommodate that person. And one of the many ways in which, therefore, the system doesn't really work for us is when it comes to menstruation. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how we try to accommodate the different needs of those of us who menstruate, women and others who menstruate, when it comes to like the workplace. What sort of accommodations do you think is sensible to try to make? Is there a risk that we try to do too much all at the same time? You know, when we're striving for equality in the workplace and acknowledging that that doesn't look the same for everyone, we try and improve paternity leave, say, so that actually women have more of an opportunity to go back to work after they've given birth. Are we at risk of kind of undermining some of the advances we're making by trying to make accommodations for menstrual health? Or is it actually, this is just fucking unfair and we need to do something about it now?
No, I don't think you can ever do too much. I think that the point of feminism is that it's a movement, and that means it involves millions of different people, and they all have their battle to fight, and the battle that they're best placed to fight. And so, you know, there's never a fight that shouldn't be fought. Any inequality that exists needs to be fought. That doesn't mean that you personally have to fight all of them, because you couldn't. But, you know, there will be someone whose fight is menstruation in the workplace, you know, and there are wonderful young activists whose fight is period poverty, and they've done... That's you! Right, okay. Well, there you go.
But that's a classic example of your gender data gap, right? Which is that food banks for a long time would give out food and they'd give out toiletries, but actually they were lacking in giving out sanitary products to people, right? And it's one of the things, if you can't afford to buy a tin of beans, you probably can't also afford to buy a packet of Always Ultra or whatever it is. But I mean, if you're going to look at a global scale, still the toll that menstruation takes on women is absolutely extraordinary. I was in Uganda in 2016, and there are girls there who are kept back from school because their families literally can't afford to buy them pads. You know, they have to use rolled up rags, or their families keep them home. Nepal, where I was last year, there is still in rural parts of Nepal, girls are put into menstruation huts.
Right, a couple of women just died.
They will either die of exposure, because it gets bloody cold in the winter in Nepal, or from smoke inhalation from trying to heat these small huts with a stove in the middle of them. So I think that actually, again, it speaks to your point about the fact that because there's taboos still, huge taboos around menstruation, the problems that are associated with them are very hard to talk about. But what was fascinating to me is I sat in rural Nepal in Baidi district in a PSHE version of a lesson, and it was, because it's funded by NGOs, it was so much more straightforward about periods than I ever got at school. In which we had, I remember, because I went to a Catholic school, so my teacher said that when she was taught about periods, her teacher had said to her, every period is God's tear for a lost opportunity. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? It's astonishing that I'm an atheist, really.
It's a really light period.
I was crying a lot. Very sad about
that. That's God has like a massive
face.
Tear.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's not get into the theology of this.
The size of a building.
Right. But I think that you're absolutely right about the way that it's because it's sort of seen as something that isn't part of male experience. It's therefore not something that needs to be accommodated or worked into policies.
I'm actually really angry about this tear thing.
Right.
I think that because it's presenting periods as this sweet, fluffy, ladylike thing. Oh, just a little tear, a whisper. And it's actually, you know, a torrent from hell.
I think one of the things, and I'm not sure if this is in your book, I've talked to you too much now, and I've ruined what's in the book and what's just you've ranted at me, but...
So rude.
No shame.
I've never ranted.
But about the fact that sometimes we talk about period pain as if it's like this, bit of pain here, but some people literally are hospitalised with it, right? Like it's crippling pain.
Yeah.
And it's just not. And again, we know also from other research that women's pain is not treated as seriously. Men are more likely to get painkillers at the doctor.
Most pain studies have been done in male mice, even though we now know that females experience pain differently. But this feels like such a great moment to tell the Viagra story.
Go on, tell the Viagra story.
So basically, for those of you who don't know how Viagra was discovered, it was discovered by accident. In a trial for heart disease, and it turned out that this sildenafil citrate, I think it's how it's pronounced, was not great at curing heart disease, but it had this happy side effect. And the reason that they knew it had this happy side effect was because it was an all-male trial. And anyway, this was in the sort of mid-90s, and Viagra was on the market within a couple of years. They, went into full-scale tests, and now men can have erections whenever they want. So that's great, happy story. Anyway, in 2013, this researcher realized that there was a good chance that the way this active ingredient works would be very beneficial for women who experience period pain, bad period pain, for which there isn't really anything. If ibuprofen doesn't work, which is the case for a lot of women, you're kind of stuck. I mean, there are some things, but they have side effects and etc. So he decided to look into this active ingredient in Viagra. And the primary hypothesis was that compared to a placebo, it would provide complete pain relief for 4 hours. And the study was extremely promising, but unfortunately it was a small-scale study, and he ran out of funding before he could categorically prove the primary hypothesis. So he called for a larger scale trial and was denied funding by the National Institute of Health twice, because curing period pain is not a public health priority. So just going to have to carry on being in pain, ladies. The sort of, I think the kicker to that is to go back to the mid-90s. What if they had had 50% men, 50% women in that drug trial? Would we by this point have a period pain relief drug in the same way that men have an erection drug?
On the plus side, though, I do get a lot of emails offering to sell me Viagra.
Well, Helen, I cannot recommend that you buy it because the studies have not been completed.
Right.
And, you don't know what they might find. So I'm not saying that don't all go out and buy Viagra. What I'm saying is the study was suggestive, and yet we've not been able to find anything out, and we're in 2019, and we still don't know because no one will fund it. And private companies won't fund it because there's no money to be made from it now. This is out of patent. So, yeah, that's fun. There's another Viagra story. It's a shorter one. It's a shorter Viagra story.
Come on.
One more.
Caroline's Viagra Story hour.
So, it's not actually Viagra. It's female Viagra, which is not the same thing. But they call it female Viagra as a shorthand because women, it's kind of a male default thing, I just realized.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just doesn't matter.
So is it a drug that increases arousal in women?
It's supposed to. Doesn't seem to really work. There may be a reason for that. So anyway, they discovered that it may interact negatively with alcohol. And so they thought, well, we should probably test this. Sprout Pharmaceuticals, the company developing it, decided to test it. Very good of them. On 23 men and 2 women. This female drug for women, and for interaction with alcohol, which you don't need to be a scientist to know is different in men and women. Like, women get drunk more easily than men. Like, that's just a very basic, observable fact in the pub. And yet they decided to test it for interaction with alcohol, a female drug, on 23 men and 2 women. That's worth telling that Viagra story.
It's a great anecdote, but that is all that we have time for. The things I have to say to you is before we end, is that this event was sponsored by the Fawcett Society. You'll be able to see that I and Sam are wearing our Millicent Fawcett necklaces, Courage Calls to Courage Everywhere, which is from the statue that Caroline made happen. And one of the things I think is really nice about this is a quote from Millicent Fawcett. Courage calls to courage everyone, its voice cannot be denied. It was her quote about the suffragette Emily Davison after she threw herself under the King's horse in the Derby. And the way that story is often told is that the fact that they were 2 factions who were bitterly opposed. It was a classic catfight, they had different tactics, they could never be reconciled. And actually we know there was a reasonable amount of interchange between the 2 of them. In the early years they worked together before militancy escalated. And one of the things that came from it is they were working with different means towards the same cause. And I think think that's a really important feminist story. You will never agree with everyone else in the feminist movement, God knows. But we have a set of goals that are really important. I know that the Fawcett Society this year is going to be campaigning on gender stereotyping. It's campaigning always on equal pay, on the bread and butter issues of feminism that are so important. So if you've enjoyed tonight's talk, you should not only buy more than one copy of Caroline's book, pre-order mine, why not? Treat yourself. But also, please do join the Fawcett Society. And a big thank you to Caroline Criado Perez.